Hey guys, you're watching The Base Politics. I'm Hannah Cox, flying solo today. This week we are talking about Kristi Noem's self-induced implosion. A new kid safety piece of legislation is once again a Trojan horse. And can you afford a nanny? Let's jump in. So guys, Brad is out this week. Like I said, I am hosting solo, but we've got lots to cover today. Before we dig into our actual material, I do want to issue one correction for our show last week. There was a segment where we were discussing the Israeli-Palestinian protests happening across campuses in America that made it sound like the National Guard had been activated at the University of Texas. It was actually the Texas State Troopers that were called in, not the National Guard, therefore not military involvement, although that had been threatened. So we just want to make sure that that was crystal clear. Now for our actual subject matter of the day. I don't know about you guys, but I have been watching a self-induced train wreck over the past week. It's been highly entertaining and yet also just a little bit mind-boggling. Governor Kristi Noem is the governor of South Dakota. She became especially prominent as a governor despite her state being usually somewhat removed from the national conversation during COVID because they famously chose to stay open. They did a ton of advertising. They spent a lot of tourism dollars trying to get people to come to the state, saying, we're open, you can come here, businesses, welcome. For the record, I was one of the people that actually did end up in South Dakota during the pandemic. Not once, but twice. Once I was there with Jo Jorgensen and her team, and then another time I went because Freedom Fest chose to relocate their conference from Vegas to South Dakota, in large part due to this advertising campaign. And I just want it to be known that, yes, while indeed South Dakota was technically open, South Dakota did not have a whole lot of infrastructure to keep open in the first place. So when we descended on Rapid City, South Dakota, Freedom Fest, which is usually like 2,000, maybe 3,000 people, it completely overwhelmed the town. Brad and I were there together, and I have vivid memories to this day of almost having to hitchhike to get around town, because there were no Ubers. The airport had one little white van shuttle that would pick up everybody en masse and drive them to their respective hotels. Now, clearly, this usually was fine because they didn't have more than 15 or 30 people flying into town on a given day. But during Freedom Fest, they had, again, thousands of people coming in. So we could not get to our hotels. We couldn't get to restaurants. We couldn't get around town. There was one shuttle for the entire event that was making the rounds between the convention center and the hotels. I lost probably 5 pounds that week. I couldn't get coffee. I couldn't get food. The restaurants ran out of actual alcohol. It was insane. But nevertheless, South Dakota did have more pro-capitalist, more limited government policies during the pandemic, and for that, I do commend them. Now, Kristi Noem, as their governor, used this new spotlight on her and her state in every way you can imagine. And because she's a pretty attractive woman, she has gained a permanent spot in the GOP and has been a larger part of the national conversation when it comes to politics ever since. Now, as of today, we are filming on Tuesday. As of today, she has released her second book. It is called No Going Back, and the subtitle says that it's about what's wrong with politics and how we move America forward. But while the book only officially came out today, she has been on a PR tour for the past week or so, and therefore members of the media have gotten, I guess, early advances of the book. Maybe they've gotten free promo copies. One way or another, people started to get their hands on this book and its materials. And it seems, bizarrely, that amongst her other positions, Governor Kristi Noem has a dog murder platform. Yes, really. So this story broke about a week ago. Multiple media outlets started coming forth with a segment in the book that discusses Kristi Noem brazenly advertising a story about herself and a time that she murdered a 14-month-old puppy. And I'm going to read you a little bit of the reporting from The Guardian where they quote parts of her book and also add a little commentary. She wrote, Cricket, who was the dog in question, was a wire hair pointer about 14 months old, the South Dakota governor writes in a new book, adding that the dog, a female, had a, quote, aggressive personality and needed to be trained to be used for hunting pheasants. What unfolds over the next few pages shows how that effort went very wrong indeed, and remarkably, how Cricket was not the only domestic animal Noem chose to kill one day in hunting season. She includes her story about the ill-fated Cricket, she says, to illustrate her willingness in politics as well as in South Dakota life to do anything difficult, messy, and ugly if it simply needs to be done. By taking Cricket on a pheasant hunt with older dogs, Noem says she hoped to calm the young dog down and begin to teach her how to behave. Unfortunately, Cricket ruined the hunt, going, quote, out of her mind with excitement, chasing all those birds and having the time of her life. I'm sorry, I'm not a hunter, but I have owned many dogs, and they have what's called natural instincts. They have an instinct to hunt, to chase things. Phoenix, my beloved Samoyed, who I would like to think would never hurt a fly, has a chipmunk he has been chasing in our backyard for several weeks now, and I live in permanent fear that he's going to actually catch it, and I will be horrified. But if he were to, I would accept the fact that Phoenix is a dog, and it is their instinct to catch and kill and eat small things. It is your responsibility as a dog owner to either train that instinct out of them or to keep them in environments where it will be restrained. It seems that that was beyond the capacities of Governor Noem, though. The Guardian goes on to say that Noem describes calling Cricket, then using an electronic collar to attempt to bring her under control. Nothing worked. Then on the way home after the hunt, as Noem stopped to talk to a local family, Cricket escaped Noem's truck and attacked the family's chickens, grabbing one chicken at a time, crunching it to death with one bite, then dropping it to attack another. Cricket, the untrainable dog, Noem writes, behaved like a, quote, trained assassin. When Noem finally grabbed Cricket, she says the dog whipped around to bite me. Then, as the chicken's owner wept, Noem repeatedly apologized, wrote the shocked family a check for the price they asked, and helped them dispose of the carcasses littering the scene of the crime. Through it all, Noem says Cricket was the picture of pure joy. Yes, because Cricket was a dog, a 14-month-old puppy, just to reemphasize that, and she did not know what she had done was wrong. I hated that dog, Noem writes, adding that Cricket had proved herself, quote, untrainable, dangerous to anyone she came in contact with, and less than worthless as a hunting dog. At that moment, Noem says, I realized I had to put her down. You had to put her down? At that moment, you didn't realize that maybe you should train her better, that you should rehome her, that you should limit her exposure to other animals and keep her actually on a leash? Like, there are at least 10 to 15 other steps that would come to mind that one should take before you jump to, we should kill the dog. According to the book, Noem got her gun, then led Cricket to a gravel pit. It was not a pleasant job, she writes, but it had to be done. No, it didn't have to be done. And after it was over, I realized another unpleasant job needed to be done. That's right, Noem's slaughter spree was not yet over. And I just want to reiterate here, she is self-reporting this. Like, had she not chose to include this in her book, nobody would have been the wiser. And I'm pretty sure absolutely nobody asked, right? Like, nobody's grilling her. No member of the media is like, have you ever killed a dog? She is just volunteering this information, like, gleefully. It is bizarre. Noem's family, she writes, also owned a male goat that was, quote, nasty and mean because it had not been castrated. So again, that sounds like a failure as an owner to take care of the pet that you have purchased. Furthermore, she says the goat smelled disgusting, musky, and rancid and loved to chase Noem's children, knocking them down and ruining their clothes. If it smelled disgusting, musky, and rancid, maybe it needed a bath. Maybe you needed to bathe your animals. Also, goats love jumping on people, particularly kids. There's a whole industry for this. It's called goat yoga. People literally pay money and go do yoga in a field because they know the goats will jump on them, and it's adorable. I don't understand how you're like this redneck farmer, rural woman, this whole like identity she's trying to really elevate here, and you don't know the basics of animal care and their basic behavioral patterns. I'm as like city folk as they come, right? I am an urban person and I know these things. It doesn't make any sense. Noem decided to kill the unnamed goat the same way she had just killed Cricket the dog, but though she, quote, dragged him to a gravel pit, the goat jumped as she shot and therefore survived the wound. Go goat. Noem says she went back to her truck, retrieved another shell, then hurried back to the gravel pit and put him down. At that point, Noem writes, she realized a construction crew had watched her kill both animals. The startled workers swiftly got back to work, she writes, only for a school bus to arrive and drop off Noem's children. Kennedy looked around confused, Noem writes of her daughter, who asked, hey, where's Cricket? Now, the backlash to this story was swift and immediate and actually almost universal. Like, hardly anybody is defending her in this because this is just beyond the pale. She's trying to present this image of like, I'm this tough woman, I can make tough choices, you can trust me to be in leadership. But like, these were not necessary tough choices. Tough choices on a farm would be like your horse breaks its leg and you have to decide to put it down. It's not shooting a 14-month-old puppy because you suck at training it or killing a goat because you didn't give it a bath. Like, I really just don't even know how you could come to her defense on this one. And again, I just can't get over the fact that she self-reported this. She thought it was a good idea to include this story. Now, once the backlash began, you might think that Noem rethought her decision in including this story, maybe would back off of it, apologize, but no, she went on the defense. Watch this media clip where she defends her actions.
The book is filled with tough, challenging decisions that I've had to make throughout my life. And I hope that people understand from this that what the point of this story is that most politicians, they will run from the truth. They will shy away and hide from making tough decisions. I don't do either of those. I tell the truth and I make tough decisions. People attacked me during COVID for keeping my state open. They called me wrong and attacked me night after night on TV for not doing mandates and not forcing people to get vaccines or wear masks. They're doing it again now with this. I just hope people will read the book, find out the truth, because this was a dangerous animal. And I had a choice between keeping my small children and other people safe or a dangerous animal, and I chose the safety of my children.
As a media personality myself, I guess I appreciate her trying to pivot and put the spotlight back on the things that made her popular, like her governance during COVID. But once again, those might have been tough choices, right? Keeping your state open, that's an actual tough choice, especially in the beginning. We didn't have a ton of information about the disease, about how harmful it was. We did know shutting down the economy would create many secondary effects, but there was a balance. I'm at least willing to acknowledge that. There was a calculated balance that had to be struck. And those that chose to err on the side of standing with individuals and not expanding the government and not leaning into those secondary consequences ended up being right historically. But when you talk about these decisions of killing a dog or not killing a dog, that just does not compute. Again, there's like 10 or 15 other things she could have done had this dog actually even been in danger, which I'm not convinced of. I love Glenn Greenwald. He's one of my favorite journalists. He's also a very well-known animal welfare activist, and he discussed Kristi's PR tour, basically maligning the dog as Cujo. He wrote, "She's now on a twisted campaign to malign the puppy as some homicidal monster threatening her children. I've worked with hundreds, probably thousands of dogs over the last 15 years and never encountered one puppy of the kind Noem describes to justify shooting her in the head." And truly, if a dog was really as rabid as she says, something else is going on. It got rabies or something. This is not how puppies behave. I've never even seen a pit bull just go totally rogue like this in its early puppy days. This is ridiculous. She had a hunting dog. It should have been able to be contained. And this isn't like some tough choice. This isn't proof that you can like handle the truth and not run away from the truth and make hard choices. This is actually proof that you're kind of a lazy animal owner, if anything. Now, what makes the story even more interesting to me is that during Kristi Noem's campaign to malign Cricket as Cujo, she actually ended up coming out with some other anti-dog stances. Watch this.
You talk multiple times about it. In fact, at the end of the book, you say the very first thing you would do if you got to the White House that was different from Joe Biden is you'd make sure Joe Biden's dog was nowhere on the grounds. Commander, say hello to Cricket. Are you doing this to try to look tough? Do you still think that you have a shot at being a VP?
Well, number one, Joe Biden's dog has attacked 24 Secret Service people. So how many people is enough people to be attacked and dangerously hurt before you make a decision on a dog and what to do with it?
Well, he's not living at the White House
That's
anymore.
the question that the president should be held accountable to.
You're saying he should be
shot? That's what the president should be accountable to. Is what is the number?
She's an entire dog murder platform.
I hadn't heard that part about Commander Meet Cricket in hell.
It's not just one proposal, it's a whole
I
thing.
didn't realize that she had a whole, I'm not retreating, I'm reloading to kill more fucking dogs. That is insane.
I love that they say she has a whole dog murder platform because it actually genuinely sounds like this. This is unhinged. This is insane behavior. I can't fathom, even if I thought these things, saying them on live TV. But it turns out that the heinous dog murder story is not even the only thing wrong with this book, which again is just coming out today as of recording and is already surrounded by all of this controversy. This is reporting from the Nebraska Examiner. They wrote Thursday and Friday, news emerged from outlets including Politico and the Dakota Scout of inaccuracies in Noem's book, the title of which, No Going Back, is now ripe with irony. The most glaring inaccuracy is Noem's recounting of a meeting with North Korean dictator Kim Jong Un during her time in Congress, a meeting that never happened. I remember when I met with North Korean dictator Kim Jong Un, Noem wrote. I'm sure he underestimated me, having no clue about my experience staring down little tyrants. I'd been a children's pastor after all. Ma'am, what? The Dakota Scout published a story Thursday casting doubt on the meeting. Noem's spokesman, Ian Fury, eventually said the anecdote was one of 2 small errors in the book that were the fault of others. This has been communicated to the ghostwriter and the editor, Fury said. According to the Scout, Kim Jong Un was included in a list of world leaders and shouldn't have been. Yet there seems to be no way Noem could have been unaware of the errors. She's been promoting the book for weeks. There is no other writer credited in the book besides her, and she already voiced an audio version of the book. Like, I can't. It's too much. They are literally blaming a ghostwriter and an editor. Fine, maybe she used a ghostwriter, but you know what ghostwriters do? They write about the stories and incidents that you tell them about. A ghostwriter did not just go rogue and make up stories about you meeting with the North Korean dictator when you didn't. And these aren't small oversights. It's not like an oopsie. This isn't something that you would forget. It's also not something that the vast majority of congressional members do. You're not a diplomat. There's no reason for world leaders to be meeting with you. This is clearly something she was doing to try to inflate her status on the world stage. And I guess she just didn't think anybody would actually check for the accuracy of the events she's reporting in her book. Either way, I think it's extremely cowardly to try to dump this on your ghostwriter, who you didn't even credit on the front of the book because you wanted people to think you wrote it on your own until the heat came, and then you wanted to dump it on some poor person behind the scenes who was only writing what you told them to write. Now, I have to roll you a few more clips of Kristi Noem discussing this particular problem with the book because her interview exchanges when it comes to this topic might be even funnier than the ones pertaining to her murdering the dog.
And I understand that they're attacking me for it, Jesse.
Yeah, they are. So they're also attacking you. I guess you said you met Kim Jong Un. Mm-hmm. Did you meet him?
I've been to the DMZ. I've been to North Korea. You know, I don't talk about my conversations with world leaders. And so when I looked at the book and I saw that excerpt, I decided to make the change to the content of the book, and that's been done.
So you didn't have a conversation with Kim when you were at the DMZ?
I don't have conversations about my conversations with world leaders. I've been working on policy for 30 years, Jesse, and that's what most people don't remember about me is I'm old. I'm a mom, I'm a grandma. I've got 3 little grandbabies.
You're not that old. So maybe you did have a conversation with Kim, but you don't want to talk about it.
I will not talk about my personal conversations with any world leaders. It just won't, and I'm not going to do it.
What have you...
I love that she says she won't have conversations about her conversations with other world leaders, although she tried to have a conversation about a conversation she had with a world leader in her book. That did not happen. So I get that you don't want to have follow-up conversations about the conversations you made up out of thin air, but this is a ridiculous excuse. Nobody's buying this. And the best part is she just keeps going. She just keeps digging this hole deeper.
But clearly, if you're taking it out of the book, it's because it's untrue.
I've given you my answer, no, and that's not the answer. I would say that, you know, this is something that I asked to have adjusted and have the content and that name removed, and that is truly what the action has been.
You said when you learned of it, you immediately took action. Mm-hmm. You recorded the whole book and the audiobook. Mm-hmm. You read this whole passage out loud. Why didn't you take it out then when you read the audiobook?
You know, I've traveled for years. I've been involved in policy for almost 30 years. And so I've gone all across the world. I've met with world leaders.
So you didn't realize when you recorded the audiobook?
When it was brought to my attention, and I asked the publisher if they would remove the name, and they did.
Okay, but you didn't answer my question. When you posted pictures and video of yourself recording the audiobook. When you recorded your own audiobook, you didn't notice this passage?
I'm not going to discuss about my meetings with world leaders.
I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you about recording the audiobook.
Did you want to talk about something else today?
No, I just wanted to know. I mean, we're just trying to get a straight answer from it. This has been...
Well, you did. I mean, and I took responsibility for it.
Let's talk first, but we don't want to talk about a lot of the topics that you address in the book. But the book is called No Going Back, but it sounds like the publisher, Center Street, is going back on a couple of the details in the book.
Oh, I don't believe so.
Specifically, when you write in the book, I remember when I met with North Korean dictator Kim Jong Un, I'm sure he underestimated me. That, as I understand, is now being removed from the book at your request.
Yes, when I became aware of that, we changed the content, and the future editions will be adjusted. And, I appreciate that. I've met with many, many world leaders. I've traveled around the world. I should not have put that anecdote in the book, and at my request, they have
That
removed
specific
it.
meeting didn't happen?
I'm saying that I'm not talking about that meeting. I'm not talking about my meetings with world leaders.
But you
there's
do
some
talk
that are
about
in the
meetings
book.
with world leaders.
There's some that are in the book, and then there's some that's not in the book. Many
But why
of them,
are there
actually.
two specific mentions of meeting Kim Jong Un and talking about him, and a specific memory? I'm sure he underestimated me, having no clue about my experience staring down little tyrants. Did you tell your ghostwriter to write that?
I've specifically have worked on policy for over 30 years. And over that time, I have traveled around the world, and I have met with leaders around the world. And that anecdote, I've asked them to change the content, and it will be removed.
It's a simple question. Did you or did you not meet with Kim Jong Un?
That's the answer that I have for you, is that it will be adjusted, and as soon as I became aware of it, that...
She didn't take responsibility for it. She blamed her ghostwriter and editor. She is continuing to deny her involvement with the story mysteriously appearing in her book. She refuses to acknowledge how that mistake was made. She just keeps saying, I was in policy. She just keeps saying, I was in policy for 30 years. I've met with a lot of world leaders. Okay, so did you get confused? Like, who was it you met with? If you, interchanged the names? And how did you only realize that had happened once other people started calling you on it? Again, this is your book. Even if a ghostwriter wrote a book about me, you better believe I'd probably read every single word twice just to ensure its accuracy and to make sure it was presenting things in the way I wanted them presented. And not only did she have the opportunity to read her ghostwritten book before it came out, but she recorded an audio version. That takes hours and hours of work of you sitting there and reading passages over and over and over until you get it right. So I'm just not buying that you didn't happen to catch this glaringly false incident until the media called you on it. And the fact that she tries to evade that question by saying, I won't discuss my conversations with world leaders again, that's not what you're being asked about. She asked you specifically how you didn't catch it when you produced an audiobook. This is just bad media training at this point, and she probably should stay off camera. But I bet she can't. There is a verse in the Bible that says, even a fool is counted wise when they hold their tongue. And that is probably the best advice I have for Kristi Noem right now, because she really was sitting up here. She was sitting pretty. She was advancing. And then she just self-imploded because she ran her mouth about things that didn't happen. She needed to inflate her ego, inflate her name. And because she bizarrely has this very cruel stance towards animals that she thought was going to be acceptable by the American public, and it is not. As you know, if you followed my other work, the U.S. government is actually the #1 funder of animal torture in the world. There is a ton of information, if you're interested in this, that has been produced by the White Coat Waste Project, where I am a fellow. They're a free market organization working to eliminate taxpayer-funded animal torture, but it is a widespread practice. And so we need more people in government who are opposed to animal cruelty and torture. I think that those kinds of positions are actually indicative of your worldview more generally. I just firmly don't believe that you can actually uphold individualism and the sanctity of human life if you treat animals cruelty and support harming them. So as a whole, I thought this was a disgusting display by Governor Kristi Noem, and I'm so glad to see both Republicans and Democrats condemning her for it. Now, unfortunately, Democrats and Republicans are on the wrong side of our next issue. We have over 60 senators that are apparently currently supporting a piece of legislation called the Kids Online Safety Act, better known as KOSA. This thing is starting to gain traction. We're not exactly sure how it's going to move. If it goes to the Senate first, it is likely to pass. Most likely, it would face a little bit more of a challenge in the House, thanks to Speaker Mike Johnson and the Freedom Caucus. But this is something you need to have on your radar because it is a massive Trojan horse, per usual. As Brad and I have been telling you for some time, almost any particular piece of legislation that comes forth under the name of child safety is usually a Trojan horse. They know that parents are easily scared when it comes to what they're up against in trying to guard their kids out in society, and they use those fears and they weaponize them against people in order to undermine the Constitution and always give themselves more power, ultimately in ways that don't ever make kids safer, but do take away more and more of your rights. Now, this bill is being pushed by Senator Richard Blumenthal, who is a particular moron. I mean, he really stands out in D.C., in my opinion, compared to many of the others. He hates tech. He is constantly trying to come in and give the government power to regulate tech, to run social media. And he's one of those people that's super old. He probably doesn't even know how to send an email, and yet he thinks he should get to dictate how this whole atmosphere runs. And I'm going to first read you his own commentary from his website about this bill. His page reads, "It's no secret that children and teenagers are more glued to their screens than ever before. Children ages 8 to 12 spend an average of over 5 hours per day on their screens, while teenagers log over 8 hours every day." I'm going to stop him there because immediately he's acting like this is something that's occurring we have no control over. Parents can control how often their kids are online. They can control the ways their kids are using the internet. It is completely BS to say that these companies have no protocols, no options for parents to come in and set safeguards, to monitor what their kids are doing. There are so many tools at your disposal as a parent, it's not even funny. So right out of the gate, he is offering a false premise of saying kids are spending all this time online, therefore they're in danger, therefore the government must come in and do something about it, and there is no other option. When in reality, the social media platforms themselves have already gone to great lengths to give parents more power. They are already doing a lot to keep kids safe online, and there really is very little excuse for the government to come in and meddle in this issue at all. But let's continue with his statement. He says, "When your child is online, they are the product, and big tech is trying every method possible to keep them scrolling, clicking ads, and sharing every detail of their life." I have so much beef with this stupid talking point. This talking point started with that ridiculous Netflix documentary a couple of years ago that went after social media from more of a left-wing perspective, and they said this in the documentary, and it just took root with a lot of Democrats and Republicans. They think it's a really good talking point for some reason. You are the product on social media. No, you are the consumer. Yes, the companies predominantly make their money by showing you ads, but they're only successful in showing you ads if you like the ads, if you click the ads, if the ads work. So as a whole, they are showing you ads for things that you like and that you might want to purchase. That does not make you the product. The product is the product. People are still selling you something. You are the consumer. It is no different than you watching TV and seeing a commercial. Are you the products then? This doesn't make any sense, but it just gets repeated over and over and over. Secondarily, nobody is forcing you to step into this role as a consumer. These are free products. You choose to use them. You choose to engage with them. And if you're worried about the time your kid is spending on them or the ways they are interacting with them, again, that is your job as a parent to intervene and set safeguards within your own home. You will just never get my buy-in with this whole idea that we need the government to come in and parent people's kids. I've said for some time, and I will continue to say, if you need the government to raise your kids, you shouldn't have had them. You shouldn't have had them. You're a bad parent. That is inexcusable. Not only should you not need the government to raise your kids, but you are a fool if you think it's going to do a good job. Be so serious. Blumenthal goes on to say, in today's age of social media, the statistics on mental health issues among youth are staggering. Yeah, they are, in large part because you shut down the schools and isolated the kids. Almost half of U.S. teens have experienced bullying or harassment online. Between 2010 and 2019, teen depression rates doubled, with teenage girls seeing the sharpest increase. In 2021, almost a third of girls said they seriously considered attempting suicide. Since big tech refuses to protect our children, it's time for Congress to step in. Again, this premise is infuriating. It is not the job of big tech or any company to come in and protect your kids. They are a company. They are offering you a product. If your kid is finding that product harmful, then it is your job to intervene and remove your kid from the equation. I do think parents should be much more involved in their kids' online experiences. And again, they have been given really good tools by many of these social media companies to assist them in that. In reality, bullying is always something that kids have had to contend with, and it probably will always be the case because humans are fallen. There are a lot of bad people out there, and that is just the reality of what we deal with, not only when we're kids, often through adulthood as well. You have to teach your kids how to contend with bullies, how to stand up to them, how to set boundaries around them, and how to defend themselves. Whether that is occurring online or offline is really immaterial. And again, this is just an essential part of parenting and raising kids that has always existed. And I don't understand this mentality people often have of like, well, this shouldn't exist. This is a bad thing out there. And I hate that my kid experiences it. So therefore, the government needs to come in and save us all. When have they ever? When have they ever swooped in and saved us all? Never. And what do you even think they could do to actually prohibit this? On top of that, I think that there is a real epidemic among kids' mental health. I think it's a serious situation that parents need to be paying a lot more attention to. I think many kids need a lot more resources. They need access to care. They need better environments. I personally think the public school system contributes to a lot of this, again, because of their pandemic policies, but also because of the environment that kids are in, day out. It is simply just a fact that the public schools have more behavioral issues than you would find in homeschooling environments or private schooling environments, which is another reason I am so pro-school choice. But once again, even in that scenario, we see that the government is kind of the underlying problem. It can't protect you from these negatives. If anything, it is likely to compound them. Fortunately, I am by no means the only person on the right that is calling foul on this piece of legislation. Former Senator Rick Santorum, who's actually known for his family values platform, talked to Mediaite about the legislation, and he said social and family values conservatives should be especially wary about advancing the so-called Kids Online Safety Act. Not only will this bill vastly increase the chances of kids and parents having their identities stolen online via the provisions in 102 and 108 of the bill, if passed, KOSA will also undoubtedly result in more content of the type that conservatives in states like Florida have been trying to keep away from kids making its way onto their screens thanks to Section 102. It will facilitate digital censorship of culturally conservative views and even appears to create a new iteration of the Biden Disinformation Board, whose makeup also happens to look like it will be determined by applying DEI principles and possibly stuffed by regulators handpicked by teachers unions Randy Weingarten and the AFT, which is her union, the American Federation of Teachers, the exact people who caused so much damage to children during the COVID-19 pandemic. Interesting how none of that made it into Senator Blumenthal's statement on the legislation. There's also a really great analysis of this legislation from the Electronic Frontier Foundation, who says, "We still believe it is a dangerous and unconstitutional censorship bill that would empower state officials to target services and online content they do not like." And I found their analysis really insightful, so I'm going to dig out some pieces of it that I thought were especially important. They went on to note that KOSA is likely to exacerbate the risk of children being harmed online because it will place barriers on their ability to access lawful speech about addiction, eating disorders, bullying, and other important topics. We also think those restrictions will stifle minors who are trying to find their own communities online. We do not think that language added to KOSA to address that censorship concern solves the problem. We also don't think that focusing KOSA's regulation on design elements of online services addresses the First Amendment problems with this bill. And they went on to break this down further to highlight some of the specific issues within the legislation. And first of all, they call it a component known as the duty of care inside the KOSA legislation. They say KOSA's core component requires an online platform or service that is likely to be accessed by young people to, quote, exercise reasonable care in the creation and implementation of any design feature to prevent and mitigate various harms to minors. These enumerated harms include 1, mental health disorders, so anxiety, depression, eating disorders, substance use disorders, and suicidal behaviors. 2, patterns of use that indicate or encourage addiction-like behaviors. And 3, physical violence, online bullying, and harassment. Based on our understanding of the First Amendment and how all online platforms and services regulated by KOSA will navigate their legal risk, we believe that KOSA will lead to broad online censorship of lawful speech, including content designed to help children navigate and overcome the very same harms KOSA identifies. And this makes total sense because when Congress enacts regulations that says big tech will be liable if kids are accessing information around these harms, then they're going to paint with a very broad brush. And ultimately, that means that kids will not be able to use the internet to get tools that could be very essential for them in trying to combat many of these harms. Whenever we start to talk about regulating online spaces, I feel like people's brains often shut down because there is so much animosity towards tech. And this is true on both the left and right. I find it very odd because I think tech is incredible. It has already done so much to improve our quality of life. And more importantly, it has empowered us in ways no humans have had in history. We have more access to information, more ability to fact check, more abilities to look beneath the rug and see what's really going on in society and in politics than ever before. And that is the real reason you see this pile continuing to increase of legislation trying to regulate social media, trying to regulate the internet, and give the government control of it. And they're always going to use these kinds of fear-mongering tactics, right? It's about the kids, it's about their safety, it's about catching violent people. They already have tools to do that. They already have laws against that. Utilize them. You don't need any more regulations over the internet. This is about speech and controlling information, period. But when we talk about these issues, I think it's really helpful for a lot of people to connect them to what this would look like in the real world, right? Because people have a better understanding of why censorship and these kinds of regulations are so problematic when you talk about things like books and newspapers compared to online spaces, even though they're quintessentially the same things. And as the Electronic Frontiers Foundation points out, there's actually a pretty deep history of legal precedent discussing these matters in existence. They say a line of U.S. Supreme Court cases involving efforts to prevent booksellers from disseminating certain speech, which resulted in broad unconstitutional censorship, shows why KOSA is unconstitutional. And they go on to discuss one important case, known as Smith versus California, which the Supreme Court struck down. And they said that this particular case dealt with a ordinance that made it a crime for a bookseller to possess obscene material. So very similar to what KOSA purports to be doing. They say the court ruled that even though obscene material is not protected by the First Amendment, the ordinance's imposition of liability based on the mere presence of that material had a broader censorious effect because a bookseller will tend to restrict the books he sells to those he has inspected, and thus the state will have imposed a restriction upon the distribution of constitutionally protected as well as obscene literature. The court recognized that the ordinance tends to impose a severe limitation on the public's access to constitutionally protected speech. And that's because a distributor of other speech will react by limiting access to any borderline content that could get it into legal trouble. So as they note, KOSA's duty of care creates a more far-reaching censorship threat than those that the Supreme Court struck down in Smith and Bantam books. KOSA makes online services that host our digital speech liable should they fail to exercise, quote, reasonable care in removing or restricting minors' access to lawful content on the topics KOSA identifies. KOSA is worse than the ordinance in Smith because the First Amendment generally protects speech about addiction, suicide, eating disorders, and other topics KOSA singles out. And they go on to finally say, we think that online services will react to KOSA's new liability in much the same way as the bookstore in Smith and the book distributor in Bantam Books. They will limit minors' access to or simply remove any speech that might touch on the topics KOSA identifies, even when much of that speech is protected by the First Amendment. Worse, online services have even less ability to read through the millions or sometimes billions of pieces of content on their services than a bookseller or distributor who had to review hundreds or thousands of books. To comply, we expect that platforms will deploy blunt tools, either by gating off entire portions of their site to prevent minors from accessing them, or by deploying automated filters that will over-censor speech, including speech that may be beneficial to minors seeking help with addictions or other problems KOSA identifies. I have to completely agree with everything that they predicted with their First Amendment issues with this legislation. And this is something that I think as a whole, we already see too much of online. As a content creator, I already struggle with platforms like TikTok or Instagram and even sometimes YouTube or Facebook when it comes to discussing certain topics. For example, I am very opposed to the war on drugs. I think the war on drugs has done so much damage to our society. It wastes so many resources, and I have countless stories to back that up. But I am hindered in my ability to educate other people about those problems because drugs as a whole are censored on TikTok. You can't talk about drugs, right? Because they don't want to promote drugs. Okay, I mean, I guess I kind of get that. But because they don't want you to talk about drugs, basically any content that mentions drugs in any capacity or any context gets banned or at least shadow banned, and you cannot actually get the information out to people. The same thing is true if you wanted to talk about like violence against women and how to prevent it. But when you have these kinds of censorious sort of regulations in place, everything gets painted with a broad brush. It makes it a lot harder to get resources to people to educate them. And once again, at the end of the day, this limits everybody's speech, everybody's access to information, which is the end goal of the government. I think we have a parenting epidemic in this country. I know there are a lot of good parents doing amazing work out there, but unfortunately, there is a growing cohort of negligent parents who want to hand off their responsibilities and their duties to anybody else, including the government, and they're more than happy to enable the government to come in and usurp everybody's rights because they don't want to do the difficult job of actually being a parent. They don't want to set protocols. They don't want to make demands of their kids. They don't want to make them mad at them. They don't want to refuse to give their kids technology because it keeps them busy, when in reality, like, probably your kids shouldn't have iPhones or iPads before they're a certain age anyways. But it's a lot easier for you to not be the bad guy, for you to not get involved, and instead to just let the government come in and handle it. I have such a problem with that mentality, and it does not only show up in this area. We are seeing this en masse. Go listen to teachers on TikTok talking about what they're dealing with in the classroom right now when it comes to behavioral issues from kids and just trying to get parents to participate and accountability for their own children. As a whole, this is just yet another Trojan horse purporting to keep kids safe online. It will do no such thing. It probably will make them less safe, have less access to information, and it will hurt all of our ability to spread information in the process. All right, let's move on to my last topic for the day. I've been enjoying a very entertaining series on TikTok that a content creator is delivering. This is a multi-part series that she has been doing for several months now. It regularly comes in my feed, and it's called You Cannot Afford a Nanny. And in this series, she finds real-life examples of people posting looking for in-home childcare while offering absolutely ridiculous rates, and oftentimes they have a list of demands that are this wide. I am going to play you one of her videos that I saw last week that I thought was particularly unhinged, and then we're going to discuss it.
Welcome to part 74, You Can't Afford a Nanny. I am seeking a live-in nanny to help me with my 2 wonderful children. I have an extra room that will be all yours. I'm looking for someone who would be a part of the family, someone who will hopefully stick around and be a friend to my kids. I have a 2-year-old girl and a 6-year-old boy. They're both great kids, pretty funny too. They really are a joy to be around. I'm seeking an 18-ish to 35-ish woman, someone fit, energetic, happy, who is able to run around and play with them, must be creative, playful, kind, empathetic, and nurturing. Cooking, teaching, and first date experience is a plus. Must have a driver's license with a clean record, no criminal record either. The job really wouldn't be too hard. You would have plenty of free time. You could even have a full-time job or work from home position. What I would need help with: some are occasional duties, some are regular. Occasional help from 7 to 8 a.m. getting them ready for school. I can usually do this, but it might be nice to have a hand sometimes. Regular cleaning of the house, dishes, laundry, not too hard. I currently do it, but an extra hand would be nice. 5:30ish, cook dinner and or play with the kids. Again, I currently do it, but the help would be nice. If I have something come up, I would need help with bedtime. My 2-year-old goes to bed at 6:30 and my 6-year-old goes to bed at 8. Times will change as they get older. Weekends I try and have things planned for us to do. I like to keep them busy and happy. Occasionally maybe you could join us, or maybe you could take them to the playground or something. Some weekends you might be free to do your own thing. Some. That's pretty much it. Not very hard. I have to think about guests to the house. I'm not sure I really want people I don't know coming over, but I don't want to be overly restrictive or anything. So this is something to think about and discuss. My main priority is keeping my kids safe and happy. About me, I'm a 42-year-old, soon-to-be divorced male. That explains things. We moved here about 1 year and 9 months ago. I don't really know anyone here, and I'm still exploring Knoxville and the surrounding areas. I love to take my kids on trips and introduce them to new things. I haven't had time for myself, but my hobbies used to include ultimate frisbee, disc golf, beer with friends, paintball, hiking, and camping. I'm very much into cars and different projects, so with this free time, I will likely be working on my 66 Mustang or upgrading the house in some way. If you think you're a good fit for my little team, please tell me about yourself, send a photo, let me know what you think of my schedule and duties list. But what about the pay, you say? For compensation, I'm hoping free room and board is enough. We live in a pretty nice house, and you would be comfortable. Would I? You would have no utility bills, rent, or food expenses. I have some subscription services that you would also be able to enjoy. And this ad is listed in rentals as a 1-bedroom, 1-bath apartment. Free room. That's not an apartment. This dad is trying to find a wife and a mother in exchange for a room. You gotta cook, you gotta clean, you gotta take care of the kids. You can also work full time, but first you gotta do the shit that I used to do, but I could really use a hand. And once you find out he's a man, it's like, why does the word hand come up so much? Oh, I could use a hand, okay. When you hire a live-in nanny, it is you, the employer, requiring them to live in. If they could live on their own, why wouldn't a nanny want to live outside of work? So providing room and board and utilities covered and food are just basic givens that should be provided to a live-in nanny. It's like it's providing the tools necessary for them to fill their job description. Why would filling your job description reduce your rate? And this person isn't even offering anything. He is offering a room for you to do everything around the house. And, and he's asking for an 18 to 35-year-old. It's like predatory posting pretty much, because it's creepy and illegal, because you have to pay a nanny for the labor and time they have worked. The average hourly rate for a nanny in Knoxville, Tennessee is $22 an hour. And that's for one child, focusing exclusively on child care. If you want to add in all the bells and whistles of cleaning and cooking and taking care of the house, that would make the rate higher, as well as having more children and being live-in. To expect someone to provide free labor that easily is valued at $30 an hour in exchange for a room is insane. And then he says you can also work full-time. And he's going on and on about how he used to be able to enjoy his hobbies, but now that he's in the process of a divorce, he can't. So that's why he needs to hire a live-in hire. I say that very loosely because it's not hiring shit. It's enslaving a human. But now that he's doing that, he gets to work on his cars. Obviously, he can afford this shit. So he needs to be paying for a nanny. And I wouldn't live then anyways. But yeah, you can't afford it. You can't afford a nanny.
I believe that what he is proposing is best known as human trafficking. Okay, that's trafficking. That is the definition of trafficking. I can't tell you the ways I cackled when it came out that this poster was a soon-to-be divorced man, because everything tracks. Absolutely everything tracks. Your wife was doing all these things for you, and now you think that you're going to find somebody else to just come in and do them in exchange for a room. In exchange for a room. Nobody wants to live with you, my dude. Nobody wants to live with their employer ever. I also like that he has the audacity to request a photo, wants somebody who is 18 to 35 and seems to care about their physical fitness and appearance. Like, I really think this might get him investigated, if we actually had an FBI that did their jobs. But this is weird. This is not okay. I am interested in this trend. I mean, this particular story stood out because I do think a lot of men, they want a wife because they do all these things for them. They don't actually want the partnership. They're just looking for a woman who will cook and clean and take care of the kids. I love that as he's getting divorced, he's like, I don't have time for my hobbies anymore. It's like, yeah, I bet your ex-wife has a lot more time for her hobbies now that she's not taking care of you too. But I also just think this broader trend of seeing people come in and post online in this completely unhinged capacity, where one, they seem to think that it's not that much work to take care of their kids and that other people are just like itching to do it for very low pay. Like, I don't even want to take care of my own kids. I think a lot of people probably feel that way. I certainly don't want to take care of yours. And if I'm going to, then I want to be paid significantly for that, which is why in-home nannies make pretty good money. And I think the reason this really irks me, the reason I want to bring it to your attention is because I think it's part of the broader issue we were just talking about. Like, I feel confident that man is not engaging himself in his kids' social media and making sure that they are not in environments they shouldn't be, setting guards on how much time they spend online. I feel confident he's probably sticking an iPad in their face so that he can go work on his cars. And this is just something that I think is a huge problem in society. I have always gotten so much flack for saying I didn't want to have kids over the years. It's gotten better. I think the education is progressing amongst people. But initially, when I used to say I don't want kids, oh my gosh, the weeping and gnashing of teeth was hilarious. Brad didn't even believe me until he started actually appearing with me on productions where I would talk about it and see the comments himself. And he was like, what is wrong with people? They would lose their minds. But I'm glad this conversation is advancing because I think there are a lot of people who should not have kids. And it's really good to recognize that before you have kids. If you're going to have kids, one, you need to actually like taking care of them and being involved with them. And two, you do need to be at a financial place in your life where you can either stay home with them or pay for childcare to look after them for you. It is crazy to think that somebody wants to come into your home, keep your kids for hours on end, and do it for less than minimum wage, which the majority of this series seems to be finding. I'm really not a proponent for the government getting involved in very many things, and I've even addressed this on other shows of mine when we talk about the cost of childcare. The cost of childcare in this country, while they are expensive for you on an individual level, are actually not that high. When you do the breakdown for the take-home pay that people get for providing the childcare and the amount of labor, physical labor that it involves, it's not this like astronomical thing that providers are asking for. So parents have got to be more realistic. Having kids is a sacrifice. Having kids probably does mean you have less time for your hobbies. Having kids probably does mean you're going to have to go without as many material items. That might mean that you work fewer hours. It might mean one parent stays home. I feel like people used to understand this, and now we've gotten so far removed from it, and yet people want to complain when they have these kinds of struggles. Having in-home care for your kids is a luxury service. There are many cheaper alternatives. You can find camps, you can find in-home daycares, even just daycare centers. You can often try to hire younger people known as babysitters to come in and keep your kids for a few hours in the evenings when you have an event. But if you want full-time in-home childcare, having a nanny is something for the upper class. That's just how things have always been. It's a luxury service. And if you can't afford to pay that, it's unhinged to come online and try to get people to take on your kids and also running your household, cooking and cleaning and doing all these additional things nannies don't actually usually do for very little pay. So I guess my whole takeaway here is if you're going to have kids, be actually prepared to have the kids and don't try to dump the problem on society. Thanks. All right, guys, we're going to skip hot takes this week because I already had hot takes this whole hour and I've got nobody to react to what I think today. So we'll save it for next time. If you like this episode, don't forget to leave us a comment, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and until next week, stay based.